Hello friends, this video on human health and diseases part 15 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. Now let us again talk about the different types of acquired immunity. Now before this we spoke about the two types of immunity, that is innate immunity and acquired immunity. Now let us see what are the types of acquired immunity. Now based on the mediator, acquired immunity are of two types. What do we mean by mediator? So we will see that very soon. Now based on this, there are of two types, that is humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. That means the cell which actually acts as the mediator in the process of immune response. Now we saw that there were two types of cells which are involved in the process of immune response. What are they? One is the B cells and the other one is the T cells. Okay, so the type of immunity which is mediated by antibody, that is which is all controlled by antibody production. So whenever antibody production comes into picture, which type of lymphocytes are going to play a role? Yes, it is the B lymphocytes. So this type of immunity is called humoral immunity. What is the meaning of humoral? The word humor is derived from fluid. Now, you would have heard of the terms aqueous humor, vitreous humor, the fluid-like regions of your eye. So, humor is actually a fluid and blood is a fluid. So, these antibodies are produced in the blood. So, that is where it got its name as humoral immunity. So, this immunity is all about antibodies, the immunity which is being provided by antibodies which are produced by the B cells. That is called humoral immunity. So B cells play a very important role in the process of humoral immunity. And the second type is cell-mediated immunity. So this type of immunity is mediated by the T cells. So it is often abbreviated as CMI, cell-mediated immunity. As I mentioned just now, that the T cells, however, they do not produce antibodies themselves, but they can recognize antigens which are present on the surface of infected cells. They can stimulate the B cells to produce antibodies. They can also stimulate the other neighboring T cells. So this type of immunity is called cell-mediated immunity. So here in this type of immunity, antibodies are directly not involved, because in this case, if you see, it is all about activating other T cells, activating other B cells. So more B cells and T cells get produced. So the antibodies is the next step. So there we reach to humoral immunity. So here no antibodies, only the T cells are involved. So this type of immunity is called cell-mediated immunity. So activation of T cells, phagocytes, etc. These are all part of cell-mediated immunity. Now as I said, T cells often stimulate other cells. Now phagocyte again is another type of cell which can actually engulf the antigen. So it can actually engulf the foreign particles. So these type of immunity fall under cell-mediated immunity. Now we will talk about yet another two types of immunity, that is active and passive immunity. So based on how antibodies are formed in the body, acquired immunity is of two types. Now previously we saw based on the type of mediator, who mediates or who controls the process of immunity. Based on that it was of two types, humoral and cell-mediated immunity. Now, based upon how the antibodies are being formed in the body, they are again of two types. What are they? Active immunity and passive immunity. So, what is active immunity? In active immunity, the antibodies are produced in the host body when exposed to antigens. So, that means that the main part here is the antibodies are produced inside the body. So whenever antigens are exposed to the body, antibodies will get produced inside the body. So let us try to understand what happens in active immunity. Now these antigens to which the body is exposed, what are these antigens? These antigens can be either living or they can be dead also. Now once these antigens enter inside the body, so the body encounters these antigens. As a result, production of antibodies happen inside the body. The B cells start producing antibodies. But this process takes time. To produce sufficient antibodies, it will happen slowly. So it takes time to give its full effective response. So as a result, what happens sometimes, if the first attack is a real attack, first attack of the antigen, if it is a real attack, then what happens? The person suffers from the disease because the antigen becomes successful in creating the infection. But if the first attack is not a real attack, maybe the first attack is being caused by vaccination, where deliberately microbes are introduced in very small amount in the body. So in that case, since the microbes are introduced in very small amount, so they will not cause any disease. But still, the body will remember that particular antigen because the B cells, the memory B cells will remember them, so that next time when there is an attack, they will be able to fight against them in a better way. So this is how active immunity takes place. So it is obviously a slow process because, as I mentioned before, that the production of antibodies will not just happen at the spur of a moment. It will take its own time to give its full effective immune response. So this is about active immunity. Now let us see what is passive immunity. So in this case, the antibodies are not produced in the body. Rather, ready-made antibodies are injected into the host body. So antibodies are not getting, the production part is not taking place inside the body. Some antibodies from outside are being injected into the body. Now these antibodies are against some specific antigen. But this process is a relatively fast process because you directly introduce those antibodies inside the body. So immediately the antibodies will start performing their job. So they will start fighting against the antigens. So this is going to be a fast process. So let us take some examples. For example, if you look at the examples of the vaccination process, where I told you, right, that there is a process where deliberately a small amount of microbe is inserted into the body so that the body recognizes it, the body also produces some antibodies against it. So that is active immunity because the antibodies are being produced inside the host body. Now, when we talk about passive immunity, it is something like this. Let us take the example when a person is already suffering from a disease. The person already got infected with a particular disease, right? But now, in order to save that person, what do? The ready-made antibodies are injected in the form of injections. So as soon as those antibodies enter inside the body, they start fighting against the antigens and help to cure that person. So that is passive immunity. So let us look at some examples of both active and passive immunity. Now both active and passive immunity can happen naturally or it can be made to happen artificially. So we will look at examples of both natural and artificial active and passive immunity. So first we will talk about active immunity, that is natural active immunity. Now by now all of you know what is natural, what is artificial. Something which happens on its own in nature, that is natural. Something which is like made to happen, that is man-made or artificial. So natural active immunity, example would be a person who has suffered from a disease once do not tend to get it again. Now you would have observed this. For example, it has been observed that a person who has already suffered from hepatitis A virus, so they do not generally tend to suffer from hepatitis A once again. Why? That's because when the first time the virus attacked, so the first time the antibodies could not be prepared quickly by the body. So the virus was successful in its attack. But the next time when the same virus attacks, what happens? The body now remembers that particular virus. So the body is going to produce more and more antibodies and attack the virus in such a way that it will not be successful in its attempt to infect the body. So the person generally do not suffer from many diseases twice, because once that disease has occurred, their antibodies have already been prepared inside the body. So this is called natural active immunity, because naturally the immunity has developed inside the body. So we did not inject anything, we did not do anything artificially, it all happened on its own. The next is artificial active immunity. So here what do we do? Now whenever it is active immunity, that means the antibodies will be produced inside the host body. So you see in this case also the antibodies are produced inside our body. So in this case also antibodies will be produced inside our body, but what will cause the antibodies to be produced? That is going to be artificial. Like in the first case, the person suffered from a disease. So it happened naturally. Nobody forcefully injected the pathogen inside the person. But in this case, the pathogen is forcefully injected into the person, and then the antigen, once it is introduced into the body, the antibodies will get produced. Now in this case, proper care is taken that the pathogen is introduced in extremely low dose. A very small amount of pathogen is introduced so that it is not harmful to the person, so that it does not cause that disease in the person. So vaccination of a smaller dose of harmless version of a disease. So the pathogen which is introduced, it is in very small amount, or it is in an inactivated form, so that the person do not end up suffering from that disease. So now that very small dose also will cause the body to produce the antibodies. Now with this, the body did not suffer from that disease, but the body is ready to fight when that actual attack occurs. So vaccines are available against many diseases like flu, cholera, hepatitis A. So all these vaccines are available, and they should be taken by a person quite beforehand. So once you take these vaccines, the possibility that you will suffer from these diseases get minimized to a large extent. Now, natural passive immunity. Now, whenever we talk about passive immunity, now the antibodies are not going to be produced inside the body. So it is going to be injected from outside. So natural passive immunity, that means here it is passive immunity. So antibodies will come from outside the body, but it will not be injected. It is not going to be an artificial process. Then let us see how it can happen. One best example is the antibodies which are received from mother's milk or placenta. Now for a newborn baby, now the newborn baby feeds on the mother's milk, and the mother's milk, the initial mother's milk especially, it is very much rich in antibodies. So when the baby feeds on the milk, the antibodies are received along with the mother's milk. So in this case, you see it is passive immunity, because the antibodies are not being formed inside the body of the baby. It is being formed in somewhere outside, that is the body of the mother. So it is passive immunity, but at the same time, it is not forcefully injected. So it is a natural process. The baby will feed on mother's milk. That is a natural process, and during this process itself, the antibodies will get transferred inside the baby's body. So this is one example of natural passive immunity. Another example would be in case of a pregnant woman. When she is carrying a small baby in her womb, the baby is connected to the mother through placenta. Now there also the antibodies are transferred from the mother's body to the baby through the placenta. So that is also an example of passive immunity, because the antibodies are not formed inside the baby's body. So the baby is receiving the antibodies from outside. So this is another example of natural passive immunity. Now we are left with artificial passive immunity. So this is like forcefully injecting antibodies, ready-made antibodies into the body. So antibodies are received through injections. Now let us take the example of rabies, that is the dog bite. So when a dog bites somebody, what happens? Do you have enough time when the dog bites a person, that toxin or that poison or the antigen is introduced inside the body. Now the body will start producing antibodies, but do we have enough time in that emergency situation that we can let the body to produce antibodies at taking its own sweet time? We do not have that much time. So what do? We inject, or through injections we forcefully insert or introduce the antibodies inside the person. So once the antibodies are introduced, it is a faster process. It immediately starts fighting against the antigens. So this is an example of artificial passive immunity. So I hope with these examples you are clear what is active immunity and what is passive immunity. Thank you. Please visit examfear.com for an easy 4-step learning process absolutely free of cost. Watch video lessons, ask questions, refer notes, and take an online test. Thank you once again.